Philomates, this is Mike Lee, Chief Business Officer, and I'm pleased to introduce our first external speaker in a series organized for the enrichment and inspiration of our esteemed colleagues. We have a special treat in store for you as we dive into the depths of knowledge and experience with a remarkable individual who has made a lasting impact in both the skies and the financial markets. I'm thrilled to introduce our guest, Mr. Jeff Muller. Jeff is a former Marine aviator who fearlessly took to the skies, commanding the mighty F-18 aircraft with skill and precision. His dedication to serving the US of A, particularly in combat missions over Iraq, is truly admirable. But Jeff's journey doesn't stop there. With a seamless transition at Columbia Business School and the venerable value investing program, he ventured into the dynamic world of hedge funds, becoming a portfolio manager at Pollen Capital. Through his strategic insights and ability to navigate complex markets, Jeff has achieved remarkable success and established himself as a true industry leader. We had the incredible opportunity to record a captivating Q&A session with Jeff and the members of Phyllo, where Jeff shared his invaluable wisdom, addressing a wide range of topics including his military service, leadership, and personal growth. Get ready to be inspired, informed, and enlightened as we embark on this virtual adventure of learning with Mr. Jeff Muller.
So I grew up in Texas. I ended up playing tennis at a small college called Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas. Had a wonderful time there, and I played for this coach that was just a real father figure and a mentor to me. He was a Marine in Vietnam, and then I got to play for him for 4 years. The reason that's relevant is after college, I was trying to see if I could make it on the lowest levels of the professional tennis tour, just because I knew that I had a small window of time where I could potentially try this and make it work, and then that window would probably close because I was not as good as that context leads you to believe. Everything changed on the attacks on September 11th, 2001. The second plane hits the North Tower. I walk outside, I call my mom, and I say, I'm joining the Marine Corps. She cries, I cry, but it's a decision that I was firm with. I've put a lot of thought since that time into, where did this decision come from? Because I was in for approximately 10 years on active duty, and it wasn't until I got off active duty, and I'd be curious to know if Mike had a similar experience. And then I was in graduate school where it really dawned on me, wow, that was a really heavy decision and not exactly the most rational one. Where did that come from? It turns out it was probably one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life. I found that my career was extremely fulfilling. Not to get too personal, but I grew up with a single mom and 2 sisters. And I think the combination of being so heavily influenced by my coach, who I just revered and still do, and being so respectful of the fact that he served as a Marine, and then being to a certain extent the only man in the house with just a mom and 2 sisters to care after, I really felt an obligation to join and do my part and serve. As I mentioned, that led to about 9.5 years on active duty. I ultimately flew in F-18 Hornets. I was stationed at a Miramar in San Diego for about 6 years. I served in Iraq. I flew out of an old Iraqi base where they flew MiG 25s out of, called Al-Assad. Flew a little over 200 missions while there. And then I spent about a year in 2009 flying out of a place called Iwakuni, Japan. And our mission in Japan was really twofold. If China moved on Straits of Taiwan, we would be among the first wave of fighters in, or if North Korea really did anything, we'd be among the first wave of fighters in. And it's so curious, the transitions that the world can take and how quickly, because I remember being in Japan thinking, what a waste of time. I can't believe we're here. We should be in the Middle East. And now obviously it's one of the hottest areas in the world. So about 10 years on active duty, as I mentioned, and then I went to graduate school and started what I call my Act 2 in life, but it was extremely fulfilling. I look back on it fondly, and I'm very proud of the opportunity that I had to even serve in this role.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that, Jeff. And if I had, I think it's interesting as somebody who also served and was really called to active duty because of 9/11. And that was for me in my junior year at West Point. When I joined West Point and I signed up to be in the military, uh, it was after about 10 years of unprecedented peace. And I think the biggest sets of like military actions that the US took in my lifetime were in Kosovo and the Iraq War One. And at the time, there was actually talk of, do we need a boots on the ground military? Like, do we need a Marine Corps and a US Army type of force? Or can we just basically have a series of like kind of bombers and indirect military actions? And is that going to be enough really for the future of warfare? And it was 9/11 that actually happened. And I actually had a younger brother who was a plebe at West Point. And in my family, there was only two of us. And the two boys in the Lee family were both in the military at the military academy as we transitioned from peacetime to actively at war at the military academy. And it became, instead of, ballroom dancing and wine tasting, which was kind of some of the more gentlemanly aspects of what the military academy curriculum had, it became very focused on, you are going to go to war, and it's going to be probably a lot more like Vietnam than it would be like for World War II or some of the other more conventional fights. So, but I would say one thing I'll add is it changes over time because we're so young when we make that kind of decisioning, I think. I think a lot of it is when you're young, you think very black and white, and in many cases you're almost like risk seeking as opposed to being risk averse. But I do fundamentally believe that the military is a calling. And I mean, Jeff and I were one of millions of Americans that could have served, but we were, it's less than 1% of the available population that can serve, who choose to serve. And so it's not just because of what we saw in the news and what we saw, what was our responsibility. It takes a lot to form the kind of person, I think. And it's a unique journey for everybody to be willing to kind of raise their hand at a very young age and put the rest of their life kind of on the line for their country. So, but let me kind of move us on. So Jeff, that's hearing about your life is awesome, and I would say that there's a few kind of jobs in the military, and I would say naval aviator kind of comes to the top of what people think of when they think of the military. But could you walk us through a little bit of what was like a day in the life of Jeff Muller, or maybe on some of maybe your key assignments in the military, maybe during your time in Japan, what it's like to be kind of on call or even deployed? Like what does that actually mean for you, and how would that dictate kind of what you had to do?
Sure. And I do want to just revisit what you said. I think framing it as a calling nails it. I mean, my family actually had an intervention with me telling me I was making one of the biggest mistakes of my life. And it was something I couldn't explain. And it really came from this place in the heart to serve. And I think as I really explore it more deeply, to be there and protect my family. So I think you worded that extremely well. So a day in a life, what a question. It was mostly making sure that my sunglasses fit properly, doing a lot of chest work in the gym, being shirtless as much as possible, and playing volleyball outside, and then drinking all night at bars. So that's obviously the Hollywood depiction. I'm joking, obviously. It's unbelievable what an intellectual pursuit it is in aviation. And it was one of my favorite things. I always tell people, it's very rare that you can find a job that's equally physically and mentally demanding. Most jobs in this world are either physically demanding or cognitively and intellectually demanding. It's very rare to find a combination. And that's one of the things I loved about it. So it was a tremendous amount of studying. I mean, I cannot overemphasize how much studying. You have, I think, up to 50 emergency procedures. And then every emergency procedure, you would have, call it 6 to 20 steps within the emergency. And these have to be memorized, rote memorization. And in fact, in flight school, if you're one word off as you are reciting these emergency procedures, or you're in the simulator and you miss a step, that's a fail. I mean, it's an intense pressure cooker. And I did a lot of work on how to get the most out of your cognitive abilities possible. And, you know, I retrieved this memory right now, thinking through it, that I had read that if you can combine physical and intellectual while you're trying to memorize something, it really makes it, it creates a more permanent imprint on your brain. So I would sit in flight school and throw a ball against the wall and catch it while reciting my emergency procedures over and over and over again to try to combine this physical and mental. And then the studying never stops. And it's really something I've taken with me into the rest of my life, which is this pursuit to constantly compound my own knowledge. So day in a life, usually wake up, get to the squadron very early, meet with the mechanics. So all the mechanics are Marines. They usually work for you. So I had a lot of Marines that worked for me. Meet with the mechanics, see how the jets are doing. And then depending on your job, there's different, they're called B billets. So there's different jobs outside of just flying. One, you could be in charge of mechanic shop. Two, you could be in charge of all the administrative stuff. You could be in charge of the intelligence work. You could be one of the Marines writing the schedule. So I did this job where I would work in operations and I would write the flight schedule for the next day, which was actually a pretty complicated jigsaw puzzle to put together because you have to have certain levels of instructor qualifications to fly with people that don't have instructor qualifications. You have to have qualifications to fly at night versus not night if you're going to do specific training. You have to have what's called crew rest, which is something that must be taken into consideration where you have to have enough time to go home, eat a meal, sleep for 8 hours before you can come back to the squadron. And again, all these rules, this is a little crass, but we would say that they're written in blood because when you skip out on those rules or you think, oh, I'm fine, I don't need quite as much sleep, that's a variable that can be a contributing factor to crashing a $60 million aircraft and potentially losing loss of human life. We would exercise every day. You know, one of the things I miss most is this brotherhood and sisterhood that is really instilled within the Marine Corps. And I know the same was probably the case for Mike in the Army. And then we would fly. Sometimes you would fly twice a day. And I'll just kind of leave you with this on the nature of the flying. Let's say you're doing a dogfighting mission, okay, which burns a lot of fuel because you're an afterburner the majority of the dogfight. And when I say a lot of fuel, you could take off from takeoff to landing, be airborne, including transit time for maybe 40, 45 minutes. Dogfighting, when you're an afterburner, you're burning about 1,000 pounds of fuel per minute. So a lot of fuel. You would prep for the brief. You would brief the flight in incredible detail on a whiteboard and sometimes using PowerPoint slides. This brief lasts an hour. And then you would go get dressed, put on your G suit, all of your gear, your helmet, your oxygen mask, go to the jet, walk around the jet, shake the hands of the maintainers and the mechanics, do all of your own personal inspections, do the dogfight, and then, and by the way, we call it ACM or air combat maneuvering. That's the fancy term for dogfighting. Then you would land, and for a 45-minute flight, the debrief could go up to easily 6 or 7 hours. And this is going through the tapes frame by frame by frame. Everything is recorded in the cockpit. So the days were intense. They were very, very challenging. You had your B billet, you had your exercise, and then you had your flying. And the debriefs, another thing I'll just add, apologize for answering this one too long, but I also really appreciated the culture. And what I mean by that is it was very respectful, but it was, I would frame it as radical candor. During the debriefs, you don't cover anything up. If you make a mistake, you call yourself out on it, looking to improve the next day. You never had to worry about, oh gosh, I made this mistake. I need to hide this and make sure no one else knows because I might not get the promotion. It was a culture of, if I share this mistake that I've made, everyone else is going to be better for it, and we can all learn together. So long, intense days, but hopefully that captured kind of a snapshot of what the day was like.
Yeah, at least from my perspective in the Army, fighter pilots in general, anyone who flies those those highly capable and very expensive, and in the scheme of the military, relatively rare airframes. Like every battlefield commander would love to have air support from, an air capability, but they're not, there's actually not that many, and they only go to the very, very highest priority missions. And so it's a very special sect within the military. And I would at least, I don't know if you ever heard this, Jeff, but from us, on the ground as the Army guys, we didn't have things like crew rest. There's no such thing as minimum amount of sleep and any of those things, but it was the closest thing that the military still had to knights in shining armor, where it's like everyone is behind these one or two officers who are represent the elite of our country. And we set them up, we armor them up, we equip their equipment already, and they go out on the front lines and they do battle on behalf of us, and they battle the knights of the other country, right? And in many ways it's very kind of old-fashioned, but using the cutting edge technology. And so they're kind of the last of the knights in shining armor is kind of the way I would think about it a lot. So
well, I'm gonna ensure that my wife hears about your description as well. But I will say what Mike dealt with was so unbelievably stressful. I don't even like to share the fact that crew rest exists within aviation to people outside of aviation, because when Mike is, you're trying to squeeze in 20-30 minutes of a nap whenever you can, and you're really running on fumes, and in combat you're running on fumes for a very sustained basis. So I really look up to all of the challenges that you faced, Mike, and it's challenges that I'd say 99.9% of humanity will never even encounter, let alone thrive through.
I appreciate that, Jeff. Let's I think you brought up something interesting, which is the Top Gun reference. And I think we should just kind of hit this head on, because I'll be really honest. If it weren't for Top Gun, the first Top Gun, I don't think I would have been in the military. It was very formative to my perception of the military, and particularly being an officer in the military. And, it goes without saying, but the Maverick movie also came out, which is an insane 20+ year sequel, which did somehow even better than the first movie in terms of box office and global audience. And it just goes to show how much excitement and how much it captures the imagination of people of all ages, of all nationalities, of being a naval aviator or a marine aviator. And but can you tell us a little bit about, you made some jokes earlier, but what does that movie get right? What do they depict correctly, and what is just completely wrong? And so just help inform folks who, if they ever get a chance to meet a Top Gun instructor, what should we not say or ask them? Because it's just not true.
So nothing's off limits, obviously. I'll start with what they got wrong. His name's Hangman. Hangman's kind of the villain slash hero at the end. His personality, which was basically a mirror of Maverick's personality in the first one, and to a certain extent, Iceman's personality. So this extremely confident, huge swagger, but to the point where it's arrogance and cockiness, can do no wrong, rules don't apply to me. Really getting into the category of a rogue human. That personality, for the most part, does not exist in aviation. In fact, when I was an instructor, I had this phrase for the most dangerous quality that I would find within students. And some of it will be present, not because the student necessarily is genuinely that way, but they see these movies and think that they have to play this role in order to be successful. And I called it, I got it syndrome. And it would be students that had incredible swagger, and you try to teach them something, they already know it. You make a suggestion, they've already heard of it. I would argue that I got it syndrome, first of all, it's not just a dangerous way to fly at Mach speeds, it's just a dangerous way to go through life. But this character that you see in Hangman, for the most part, either doesn't exist or they get washed out pretty quickly. It's extremely dangerous. And that leads to what I think they got right. So first of all, from a cinematography perspective, they really nailed the capabilities of the jet. I think they nailed what it's like to be in the jet, because in the sequel, they put cameras in the jet. I think we've all read interviews where Tom Cruise put all of the actors through flight training. So when you see their faces contorting, and I mean, those are real G-forces creating strain that they are fighting against. And then what I think they really got right is the fact that it's a very serious and dangerous job. And I'm just going to assume everyone's seen the movie. So, there are moments when I think Rooster has, his confidence issue, and he's scared. It can be scary at times. There's also kind of the humility that Tom Cruise's character Maverick goes through as he's realizing that he might have to put people into combat, and there's a lot of people that probably aren't going to come back. So I'd say that what they got wrong is the cockiness and arrogance. That is pure Hollywood. In fact, I'd say that's Hollywood at its finest. For the most part, it does not exist at all. And then the seriousness, the brotherhood, the sisterhood that exists, and the humility, I think is really, they nailed it. I mean, I was always of the opinion that the second you lose your humility in the jet, you may lose your life. I'd say everyone that's flown has had at least one moment, probably tens of moments, where something happened and you were that close to not making it home for dinner that night. So I'd say those are the what they got right, what they got wrong.
Got it. And guys, if you have more of these, we will open up we'll open it up shortly to some questions that you have. And if you guys want to riff off of the Top Gun, I know I could always ask a lot more on those, but
I will say, if I may, some of you are probably doubting what I'm saying. It's unbelievable when I talk to people, and this is the number one thing I'll usually say, where people will follow up and be like, yeah, but seriously, there are a bunch of hangmans and you guys go out to the bars and everyone, I just can't believe that it's this humble of a bunch of people. And I think that's the power of Hollywood.
Yeah, like the myth is bigger than reality almost, right? The personas and the characters they create are bigger than like the what the Navy can do. But Ritika, did you want to ask a question?
It's just a follow-up question here. Akhil has mentioned this. It's from Akhil's side. So, have you met like Tom Cruise or anyone from the team? Anyone from the Top Gun team, Jeff?
Have I met anyone?
Yeah, did you get a chance to like meet Tom Cruise or anyone from the Top Gun team?
I have not, and it's funny you bring that up. That so I was an instructor at the Marine Corps version of Top Gun. There's Top Gun for the Navy. There's Weapons School for the Air Force. They call it MOTS 1 for the Marine Corps, but they're all effectively the same thing. And I was meeting with a client in Korea, and the salesperson with me said, Jeff used to be the equivalent of a Top Gun instructor. And she misheard him and thought that he said that I was in the Top Gun movie. And she went crazy, right? Like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. And I'm thinking, wow, I can't believe she's so impressed with this. And then I realized where the misunderstanding is. And I said, no. I wasn't in the movie. I don't know any of the actors. I actually did it in real life. And, I'm thinking this is equally as impressive, right? And she's so disappointed that I did it in real life and I wasn't in the movie or knew the actors, which I thought was funny. But yeah, I have not met them, but I know some folks that were the stunt doubles, and I think they did a great job in the movie.
You talked about some scary moments. If you can, whatever is like, shareable, open source here. Can you talk about some of the scariest moments that you ever had in your career, whether it was in the cockpit or outside of the cockpit? And also some of the proudest or maybe just most memorable moments from your time in uniform?
Sure. And if I may, I'll kind of thread in. I'll tell 3 brief stories, and I'll thread in one of my biggest takeaways, or that's helped me now in my current role and life in general. So, the F-18 was getting older and older toward the end of my career, and I started having some emergencies where there's a lot of redundancies in the F-18, and sometimes even those would fail. So I took off. There's 2 of us in the cockpit out of Hawaii just to move a jet to Japan. And I got to tell you, on a personal note, I always felt like it was more dangerous to move these jets over thousands of miles of ocean than to fly in combat, to be candid. And if you're wondering how we had that much gas, we would have tankers that flew with us, and we would tank airborne along the route, so we could stay airborne for a long period of time. So we're on the way to Japan, and we have this horrendous emergency where we lose all electronics, our generators, our avionics, our radar, our radio. We have to signal to our wingman that our comms are down and we need to land immediately. And we're about 500 miles from the closest piece of land that we can land on, and it happened to be this very storied location from World War II called Wake Island. And more importantly for us, it happened to be a place that we had, that we knew there was an operational runway there. So it takes us over an hour to get there. The whole time, I'm sweating, we're going through our emergency procedures, we're going through our checklist, anticipating which system is likely to fail next. We finally see this island, and we're coming in to land on short final, and the jet just felt horrible, like it was coming apart at the seams, probably because it was. And it was the only time in my career that I ever landed with my hand on the ejection handle. So hopefully this isn't a spoiler, but we made it. We land, we park, there's a guy running over to the jet. We're probably the last people on Earth he expected to see that day. You should Google Wake Island, W-A-K-E, after this. It's literally in the middle of nowhere. And I'm coming down the ladder of the jet, and I just start kind of gushing to him, right? Like, wow, that was one heck of an emergency, first time in my career, had my hand on the ejection handle. And right when I say that, his face just goes completely white. And he says, sir, because Wake Island is an atoll, it has one of the largest shark populations in the world circling it. And I don't even know if that's true. I've never looked it up. There's some things in this world you don't look up, but that was definitely a memory I'll take with me for the rest of my life. In terms of fulfillment, I have to say, everyone experiences combat differently, and combat is a very intense environment. It's very chaotic. And this is kind of what I was referencing at the beginning. I am so grateful for the opportunity to play what I would kind of frame as this guardian angel type role for the men and women on the ground in combat. I mean, I feel like these are some of the bravest men and women of our generation. And I had the opportunity for about 7 months to fly at about 18 to 25,000 feet above them, talk to them on the radio, scout out their routes with our infrared and CCD cameras, which had very high fidelity, and be there for them when they were in firefights. And I'll carry that forward for the rest of my life. It was extremely fulfilling, very fulfilling. I know this is odd to say about combat, but it really makes me feel like by protecting them and, regardless of your politics, by having the opportunity to protect these folks on the ground, it really enabled me to put some good out into the world. And then the last thing I'll say on kind of one of my biggest takeaways is the power of positive self-talk. And what I mean by that, I mentioned that we did a lot of dogfighting. During the debriefs of these dogfights, which I mentioned can last up to 6 hours long, you are required to recall as much as you can from the fight itself. One, this helps the flight lead recreate the dogfight on a whiteboard, and then you go to the tapes to maximize learning. And two, demonstrating strong recollection it really highlights the fact that you were aware of what was happening while you were airborne, which is easier said than done. So when I first got to flight school, learning how to fly in the F-18, here, I'll just give you an example of what a debrief would look like for me. So, the flight lead would say something like, plunger, can you walk us through the fight? You can't pick your call sign, don't ask. So, a typical debrief answer for me when I was at this point in flight school, I'd like raise my shoulders, palms to the sky, terrified look on my face. I'd start moving my hands around, and then finally, because now they're airplanes, and then finally kind of mutter something pathetic like, I think we went left, and then it's a little fuzzy. And a little fuzzy was generous. I had no idea what happened. It was almost like I blacked out. And this was really starting to concern me. I thought, I think we all harbor these thoughts sometimes. Maybe I'm just not cut out for this line of work. And it was scary, and it was a lot of self-doubt. So I decided to go directly to my commanding officer, which was kind of a bold move at the time, and ask him, this guy flew perfect, how he remembers these flights so well. So one day I see him walking down the hall. There's no one behind him. There's no one behind me. And I'm thinking, now or never, Jeff. And I just say, sir, question, how do you remember these fights so well? And he leans in and looks me right in the eye. And I'm thinking, my career is saved, right? And he says, right before the fight starts, I say out loud into my oxygen mask, I will remember this fight. And that's it, right? And I'm like, thank you, sir. Can't wait to take this tool, put it in my toolkit. Have a good afternoon. And obviously, as I'm walking away, I'm thinking, my career's over. What is this garbage? There's no way this is going to work. And I'll never forget the next day I had a flight and it was a dogfight. And I'm thinking, can't get any worse. And right before the fight starts, I blurt out loud into my oxygen mask with full conviction, I will remember this fight. And my recollection wasn't perfect, but it was close. And I did it for every fight I was in for the rest of my career. And it was just the most impactful example to me of the power of positive and genuine self-talk. And I still do it to this day. So that would be probably one of my biggest takeaways, in addition to the fulfilling opportunity I had to do the job.
Oh, awesome. I'm gonna ask maybe a couple more structured questions, and then I'm gonna open it up to the group. So if you guys have questions or wrote them into the document itself, I want to give you the opportunity to just hop on the mic and have a direct interaction with Jeff. But I'm going to ask you two kind of very short questions in and around, just like it's just procedural, and this is just kind of more military nerd stuff. But number one is how do you actually get selected to be an F-18, pilot or radio intercept operator? Like, how do you get to do that? Because everybody wants to do that, and so that's question number one. And is it like this crazy system? Is it this lottery, or like what's the system? And then number two, I remember very distinctly a couple flight things that happened in the original Top Gun, the whole air brakes maneuver where you hit the air brakes and they fly behind you, and then it like, and I also remember that there was this move that a next gen aircraft was able to make in the new Maverick, where he does like this high yaw, like kind of almost auto like rotation move in midair to avoid a missile strike. And are those at all, like, is that more of the Hollywood stuff, or is that actual based on some realities? And so those are the two quick questions. And then guys, after that, raise your hands and we'll let you answer some or ask some questions, and I will call you out by name. Cool.
So the Navy and the Marine Corps and the Air Force have been doing this for a long time, and they've got the process really down. At a high level, it comes down to your preference and the needs of the Marine Corps. You turn up to flight school, take a bunch of academic tests called ground school, and then you start flying in a little propeller plane. And if you don't have the eyesight and you're a backseater, you're going to be in the back of the propeller plane. And then from there, you keep advancing into more and more advanced aircraft. And then at a certain point, based off instructors' subjective view, your actual grades, and the needs of the Navy and the Marine Corps, you will go into jets or helicopters. And then from jets, there's a couple different jets you can go into. And it's a lot of flights. I mentioned, throwing the ball and memorizing the emergency procedures. Flight school is roughly 2 to 3 years, depending on how jam-packed the pipeline is. And you're getting graded at every turn. And frankly, you're getting graded, it's safe to say, even more than you're getting formally graded. So you have actual grade sheets. Every flight has objectives. You get tested. You're in simulators. You get tested in the simulators. And then also how you conduct yourself. If you are a team player, easy to get along with. All of these things will weigh in on where you end up in that pipeline. And then, I remember that yaw maneuver because I let my kids watch Maverick. And I think right when that happens is when Rooster repeats the worst word in the movie, which made me feel like a terrible dad. But yeah, I did have the opportunity to go to Alaska for a couple weeks and fight against the F-22 Raptors. And I mean, I've never fought against an F-35. I got out before that really came on in terms of mass production. But yeah, these new aircraft, the F-22 Raptor, I think is just absolutely ridiculous. And these new aircraft can do things that are pretty impressive.
How about the air brake maneuver? Is that real?
I think that you're not going to get anyone with that. I think that was a carryover from the first Top Gun. I think they really struggled to shoot that in a realistic way. One, because what I've read is there was no flight training, so they couldn't put the actors in the. You can't just go from 0 to you're in an F-14 Tomcat. They were all vomiting and getting sick. And I think the hit the brakes, fly right by was just basically a nice catchphrase that worked for the movie, but that's not something that would be really common.
Awesome. Okay, guys. So I will I'll turn it over to you. I know a lot of you put in questions, but feel free to go ahead and ask those just so you can have a chance to just chat with Jeff and he can hear your voice too. If you'd like to ask a question, go ahead and raise your hands. I have plenty more, Jeff. We only went through about a quarter of what we planned anyway, so you know this, so don't feel bad if you guys don't run up, but I see we're spooling up. So Nitin, I saw your hand first. Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mike. Hey, Jeff. So just like when you were mentioning call signs, that's where this question kind of, let's say, popped in again. So how are call signs assigned or determined? And if multiple people want to have the same call sign, what do they do?
So great question. In the Air Force, as I understand it, you get the coolest call sign you can possibly imagine. In the Navy and the Marine Corps, they basically wait until you do something really stupid. And then that moment typically results in a call sign. And then the worse the call sign, the higher the likelihood that it sticks for life. So Air Force, pick your call sign, probably going to end up as, I don't know, Superman or Death Angel or something like that. Marine Corps, Navy, worst call sign you can possibly imagine is probably going to be the one that you end up with.
So what happens, let's say, like if two people want Maverick?
I can't speak to the Air Force because I was in the Marine Corps, but the chances of getting Maverick in the Navy or the Marine Corps, I would say, are close to 0.0. And one of the best ways to guarantee that you will not get a call sign would be asking for a specific call sign. It's not it's a very collegial environment, but there's also some carryovers. It's not a nice cuddly environment.
Awesome. All right, let's move on. So Shubham?
Yeah,
go ahead.
Shubham. Yeah, no, I'm saying Shubham Tiwari.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah, hi. So one of the things that I find really fascinating when I watch movies like Star Wars is that, the planes take a lot of hit, right? And they are still able to fly. So I was like, are these fighter jets as indestructible, as durable as they show in the movies, or they're like very fragile? And yeah.
They're pretty, it's an interesting question. I just finished a book called Skunk Works by Ben Rich. He ran Skunk Works for many years. This is a super secret R&D laboratory within Lockheed Martin. They invented the U-2, they invented the SR-71 Blackbird. And, at the end, he had some cost-saving tips for the government. And one was, apparently the way Russia traditionally made fighter jets is to make them indestructible. Like most MiGs can take a lot of hits. Obviously, if they get hit by a missile, it's going to be taken down. But most MiGs, and you hear about stories from World War II where planes would come back with a number of bullet holes. I think the F-18 is probably pretty durable. It has a lot of redundant systems. Every system within the F-18, for the most part, has some form of redundancy, to include two engines. It's interesting. I've only flown in an F-16 once, and it was actually through the Navy's Top Gun. And we had an emergency procedure with the engine, and I'm thinking, oh, this is not that big of a deal, until I realized there's only one engine, and it's actually a really, really big deal because in the F-18, there's two. You lose one engine all the time, it's easy to get it on deck. So I can't speak to the newer aircraft, but I think that generally speaking, the stealth technology, so the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, the F-22 Raptor, the F-117 Nighthawk, these aircraft, I think if they're durable and that I think they're very survivable, but if one little thing goes wrong, you know, there were stories where there was the F-117 Nighthawk suddenly was not passing the radar test that it was supposed to pass to the same degree. And it was because one screw had been elevated or raised, I think an eighth of an inch. And the cross section from a radar's perspective, it made it very visible to the radar. So I think that's kind of the level of advancement that we're at now, where almost nothing can go wrong with these aircraft, or they won't work as advertised.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Okay, Ronit and then Akhil.
Cool. Thanks, Mike. Hey, Jeff. So I wanted to get a sense around how are pilots trained to make split-second decision making, right? Because you have a bunch of controls that you got to look at, and then you also have your ammunition and stuff, and then you have, you know, probably missiles being shot at you. How do people get trained around that stuff?
It's such a good question, and it's interesting because in my current job, I do not make split-second decisions. I make very, very long, thought-out decisions that I will sleep on for, you know, maybe 6 months before I decide to buy or sell a business. And flying, there are times when you just have to make a split-second decision, because even no decision could have serious ramifications, and the magnitude of no decision is very material. So I think that it really comes down to training. We would fly training missions nonstop, and then there are certain situations where you almost can't train for. I had a situation in Iraq where it's 3 o'clock in the morning. There is a convoy that gets hit by an IED, an improvised explosive device. A firefight ensues. I'm on the radio with the people. Air traffic control is, in my opinion, taking too long to figure out what to do. It's very real time, very chaotic, and there were multiple aircraft from different services and different agencies stacked below me in my orbit. So the way it would work is I would have, or we would have maybe 17 to 19,000 feet, and then someone would have 14 to 16,000 feet, you know, with a 1,000-foot buffer all the way down. And we took the decision to go out over a lake where there were no aircraft airborne, drop 17,000 feet straight down vertical, and then come back at about 300 feet off the ground, doing about 600 miles per hour to directly fly over this firefight. We would call it a show of force. It was so loud, it usually quelled any firefight, because the enemy would obviously be concerned that we would come back with an even greater show of force. And, you know, we had no permission to do this. In fact, it went against what air traffic control was telling us. And I knew that my North Star was to protect the Marines on the ground. I had an incredible commanding officer. He's a general now. His name is Mo Mahoney. And I knew that as long as I was sticking with my compass, so to speak, my North Star, which is to protect the Marines on the ground, that he would have my back. So we felt very confident taking this decision, and we landed, and he said, "You did the right thing." But, you know, that's a tough decision. There's nothing in the rule book about it. And we could have easily been in a lot of trouble for going against orders, so to speak. We did not have permission to do that. But I knew that if we just sat up there with every passing second and every passing minute, guys on the ground that had just encountered a bomb going off were going to continue to get shot at. So I don't know. I mean, maybe to answer your question, it's a combination of training and first principles. If we take this to Amazon, one of the strongest businesses on the planet, their first principle is the end customer. I feel like I've never worked there, but if you did anything that maybe was outside the rules, but it had the customer in mind, Bezos would probably say, I support you with that decision. So maybe that's an answer. That's such a good question. I don't really have a canned answer for you, but I think it's training and first principles.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, I think last question, Akhil.
Okay, Jeff, so I'll take a step back and go to your current job. So you run a long only investment fund. And so what do you optimize more? Is it growth stocks or is it the value stocks? Because in the recent downturn, it's the growth stocks that are taking a beating and the value stocks are giving better return. So from a long only fund perspective, where do you optimize more?
So look, we are a growth fund, but I teach a class at Columbia Business School called Compounders that's within the value investing program. First and foremost, all investing is value investing because you're trying to buy something today that is worth more tomorrow. And I would argue that this debate that is centered around growth versus value and what is growth, what is value, is more a function of US, so American style box investing, where many financial advisors or institutions will want to carve up people's portfolios into different allocations, and it's easy to call one thing value and one thing growth. So I don't look at it necessarily as a growth versus value debate. The objective for our portfolio, the global portfolio, is to invest in about 25 of the best businesses on the planet, highest quality with as close to insurmountable competitive advantages as you can imagine, that in aggregate for the portfolio can compound underlying earnings per share growth at about 15%. And then as long as we don't overpay for these businesses, and that's where the art of investing comes in, then the stock appreciation or the client return should mirror the earnings growth of the underlying portfolio. And in fact, that's what Poland Capital has done since 1989. We take a 5+ year view on every investment. So whether value or growth is outperforming within the next 6 months is not something that I focus on. What I focus on is allocating capital to the best businesses in the world that I believe can continue to compound at healthy rates over the next 5 to 10 years. And I'll add that we could have a whole conversation about this, but we've owned Alphabet for, I think, in the US only strategy since roughly 2005. We owned Oracle for many years. Some years these are growth stocks, some years these are value stocks, but to us, we look at it as a business owner, determining whether we would want to own that business or not.
Got it. Thanks.
All right, Jeff. Well, first off, that hour flew by. I feel like we could easily tack on a whole nother hour, but we just want to be respectful of your time, Jeff. And just like you talked about during your fulfillment time, most fulfilling experience in the military, being a guardian angel for the troops on the ground, during my time in the military, I really appreciate you for that role that you've done. And in a way, even post your time, just kind of swooping in and helping us out to get our L&D program off and to a very, very strong start. Once again, I really appreciate you kind of coming in and helping us out and giving us support that we could have not gotten otherwise. So from Phyllo to just you personally, I just want to thank you very much for taking time out of your really busy and very, competitive and very valuable time, as you can tell from what his current job is. So Jeff, thank you for coming and just sharing a little bit about your experience and sharing some of your wisdom with us. I know it's very appreciated by everyone at the company. And so I just want to give you a quick thanks and just a round of applause from everybody in the company.
Well, Mike, I appreciate you. Ritika, thank you for putting this together and for the idea and for all of your interest. It's a very human connection to have this level of curiosity. I know there's probably a perception around American veterans, and hopefully we've brought that more to a human level. Your questions were wonderful, and thank you all.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you so much for taking the time out. I think we couldn't cover like all the questions, but like most of them were covered and it was really insightful. So thank you again for taking the time out and for sharing your experience with us.
Great. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys. Thanks, Jeff.